Okay, members, the next item on the order paper is a motion on ending holiday hunger. Clerk, could you please read the motion?
That this Assembly recognises the high levels of child poverty and the increasing costs associated with sending children and young people to school. Further recognises that the rising cost of food is putting many families under huge financial pressure. Acknowledges the importance of children and young people receiving a nutritious meal and the role that plays in their learning and development. Agrees that the cut to the School Holiday Fund food grant scheme has had the most impact on disadvantaged and vulnerable children and young people, and calls on the Minister of Education to bring forward a plan to end holiday hunger.
Thank you. I call Donny Baker to move the motion. Thank you, Donny. The Business Committee has agreed to allow up to 1 hour and 30 minutes for this debate. The proposer of the motion will have 10 minutes to propose and 10 minutes to wind. As an amendment has been selected and is published on the Marshall list, the Business Committee has agreed that 15 minutes will be added to the total time for the debate. Donny, please start the debate on the motion.
Our children and young people deserve the best start in life. As workers and families continue to face financial pressure, our most disadvantaged children are paying the price. Savage Tory cuts to vital programmes in our schools, such as holiday hunger payments, Healthy Happy Minds, the Engage programme and extended schools, have targeted the most vulnerable children and young people. These cuts have left workers and families in crisis, along with raising costs of school meals, uniforms and transport. We know the same children receiving free school meals have lower attendance rates and are more likely to leave school without any GCSEs. So we must do all we can to support our most disadvantaged children, to address inequalities and to give them every opportunity to flourish in life. Working together across this chamber, we can stand up collectively and fight back against toxic Tory cuts that have pushed more and more children into poverty. We can help workers and families and ensure they no longer have to choose either to heat their home or feed their children. During school time, schools work hard to take extra steps to ensure children receive a meal. Some schools provide free breakfast clubs and others have tried to extend free school meals where possible. But schools cannot do this themselves. Their efforts to feed children has resulted in higher expenses. Some principals have even paid for extra school meals from their own pockets. I want to commend our small businesses, community and youth groups who have gone over and above to ensure children do not go hungry over the holidays. In my constituency, local groups and clubs and businesses are supporting schools, helping to give children a breakfast and ensuring young people are ready to learn. Monkstown Boxing Club has been a shining example in the effort to support children and families. In the last year alone, they have supported many children and families, ensuring they have meals during the school holidays. As Tory cuts continually let down our young people, it is our community, youth and sports groups who are stepping up during the holidays to feed our children, to educate them and ensuring they are safe and happy. So today, let's commit to ensuring our schools, community and youth clubs no longer have to support children by themselves. Let's commit to working across party lines to deliver real change for our children and young people. And I would urge the Education Minister, working alongside the Executive, to bring forward a plan to end holiday hunger and to give our children every chance to flourish in life. This is the least our children deserve. So I'd ask members to support this motion and the amendment.
Thank you, Donny, and I call Kate Nicholl to move the amendment.
Moved.
Thank you, Kate. So you'll have 10 minutes to propose the amendment and 5 minutes to wind, and all other speakers will have 5 minutes. Kate, please open the debate on the amendment.
Thank you, Principal Deputy Speaker. And I want to thank the proposers for bringing such an important motion to the House. As an Assembly, we have so many issues we need to address, so many priorities, but few are as important or as urgent as poverty, specifically child poverty. And as Danny said, our children deserve the best. We know that when children have a good start in life, a safe and stable home and emotional support within their families and communities, they are more likely to thrive and have better outcomes throughout their lives. So the Audit Office's report on child poverty, which shows 20% of our children who are living in relative poverty, is deeply concerning. 1 in 5 are not just a statistic, they are real people and people we are failing. And in 2024, that is wholly unacceptable. The purpose of this motion is not to address the root cause of poverty. We know we need a comprehensive anti-poverty strategy. What's more, we know what needs to go in that strategy. The sector and the expert panel have told us and been very clear what we need to do. What this motion seeks to do is to recognise the very real impact the cut to the school holiday food grant has had and call for interim support, and also recognise the contribution the voluntary and community sector have been making, who have been shouldering this burden in the absence of our action. The rising cost of food is putting many families under huge financial pressure. People are struggling. We see it every day in our constituency offices, and we hear about it. Food bank usage is at an all-time high. And I read an article a few months ago from a principal in Craigavon who described one of her pupils fainting from hunger, and a parent who literally had 16p in their purse, and the only food they were able to take home was a hamper that the school had collected for. I think that is shocking. My first kind of real I remember sitting listening to the news, and I was feeding my son porridge at that time, and Dr. Julianne Maney came on the radio, and she was talking about the reality of child poverty and hunger in the hospitals, and toddlers and children who were squirreling away food in their nappies so that they would have something to eat later on. And it struck me that children in our city, for so many children in our city and across Northern Ireland, it's just not getting any better. These numbers have been so high for so long, and there isn't any movement on it. When schools close for holidays, that should not signal the end of support for children who need it most. No child should have to worry about going hungry over the school holidays. And the reality is the cut to the school holiday food scheme has had the greatest impact on disadvantaged and vulnerable children, and we support this motion's call for the Minister of Education to bring forward a plan to end holiday hunger. There's a gender element to it too. Research by the Women's Consortium and Ulster University found that the impact of the cost of living emergency is forcing women to skip meals and go hungry in order to feed their children. And anyone who has experienced poverty, the all-consuming, debilitating shame that comes with it, knows that this doesn't just impact physical and mental health. It often results in people getting into deeper debt. And these payments have been a lifeline for so many people. The Alliance Amendment seeks to urgently progress and publish the review of eligibility criteria for free school meals, and it's here I wish to concentrate my remarks. We know children from working families on low incomes are often not in receipt of free school meals and are going hungry, and teachers are on already stretched budgets and doing what they can. In my own constituency of South Belfast, Malone Integrated College, Principal Mrs. Moore has been using grant money to provide free food for pupils who, she said, if they didn't get that meal in school, then they wouldn't get one hot meal that day. And we need to address this. There's another example that was my colleague Nuala McAllister told me about in North Belfast, where one school was able to use money from Belfast City Council to provide a free meal for the month of January. And every single child, bar one, in that school availed of that. So the criteria really needs to be amended. I've spoken about childcare investment being an anti-poverty tool, and it is welcome that there was cross-party support there. We've also recently spoken about school uniforms being made more affordable, and hopefully this motion will contribute to how, as an Assembly, we address the multiple levels of vulnerability, because there is no silver bullet to this. It's how we address the multiple levels. I want to finish by reading something that Sheena McMullen from Action for Children said. She said, "We know that child poverty ruins childhoods and damages children's life chances. Those that do experience poverty and hardship do worse at school, earn less as adults, suffer poorer health, and are more likely to need help from a social worker. This hardship is resulting from structural and systemic barriers within the welfare and economic system, which most families have no say in. But you and your Assembly and executive colleagues do." And she's right. We must do everything we can to eradicate child poverty, to address inequalities, and to ease the burden of impossible choices that people in 2024 have to make. To heat or eat is unacceptable. Thank you.
Thank you. I call Cheryl Brownlee.
Thank you, Madam Principal Deputy Speaker. I rise in support of the motion and the amendment today, and I welcome the opportunity to contribute to this debate. It is the job of the government to protect the most vulnerable in society. Children by nature are vulnerable. They cannot support themselves by getting a job, securing an income, and therefore they must rely on others to provide them with the basic necessities of life. It is a parent's guardian's duty to provide the support, but in the past few years, providing that support has become very challenging for many, particularly those in low-income households. Poverty rarely has a single cause, and it can be difficult to separate the causes and effects. However, it's clear that factors including low wages, worklessness, childcare, opportunities, and the rising cost of living are all significant drivers to child poverty. It can be a vicious circle. Adults who grow up in poverty tend to earn less, have a higher risk of unemployment, and therefore pay less tax over their lifetime, and they're more likely to need much more support. As a party, we're committed to working with the Executive to support children and young people and families in poverty and breaking that cycle. It is crucial, therefore, we see a collaborative approach taken by all ministers to tackling this issue. As stated in the recent PAC report, siloed working can lead to siloed interventions and ultimately poor outcomes. Children experiencing poverty interact with multiple service users across both statutory, voluntary and community sectors. Therefore, effective partnership working is key to improving these outcomes. And I welcome the acknowledgement of Monkstown Boxing Club. They are very, very much at the heart of the community, helping everyone, and I commend all the voluntary groups who do this on a daily basis. It's also critical that clear monitoring mechanisms are co-designed and understood to measure objectives and outcomes and to enable data to be collated and reported in a timely fashion, as well as accountability and ownership from various departments being clearly understood by all involved. There's growing evidence of a link of poverty and educational underachievement, which shows there's a massive 24% gap in the attainment of GCSEs for those children receiving free school meals. In the same publication, it also reports a gap in healthy life expectancy between the most and least deprived areas of 11 to 15 years. 11 to 15 years, as well as children from deprived backgrounds being 4 times more likely to develop a mental health problem by the age of 11. It was also shocking to read that in the last 5 years, the inequality gap in the proportion of P1 children classed as obese widened from 45% to 93%, due to the increase in obesity rates in the most deprived areas, while in the least, there was no notable change. These facts are terrifying and cement my opinion that we need to take action to address this issue. The question is not whether we need to act, but how. During the pandemic, direct payments were made to eligible families through the Education Authority, partly because this was mostly convenient and the efficient means of delivering that vital lifeline in extremely difficult times. And I want to recognise the work of the previous Education Minister, both Peter Weir and Michelle McIlveen, on this scheme. But we need to deliver a sustainable, data-based plan to address holiday hunger at the point of need, but also addressing the range of factors that can cause this need. In other parts of the UK, including England and Wales, previous holiday food grant schemes have incorporated a number of delivery models, including vouchers that can be exchanged for food, or combining access to good meals and other holiday activities and summer schemes. And it's vital that we address all available options to ensure we deliver the best scheme here. We've spoken in this chamber in recent weeks about the need to invest in SEN, the need to invest in our school estates, the need to support families with uniform costs, these holiday payments and childcare. And I know the Minister will want to do all these things, but of course I know that we will need substantial funding to deliver on these. In finishing, I want to reaffirm my support for this motion. I welcome this and I want to have progress on this as much as possible. Thank you very much.
Thank you, and I call Tom Elliott.
Thank you, Principal Deputy Speaker, for allowing me to speak on this significant debate here today. And it's absolutely right that this Assembly and indeed the Executive here coalesce on issues relating to any child going hungry, something that shouldn't happen in today's society in Northern Ireland or indeed anywhere else throughout the world. It would be remiss in the extreme not to delve deeper and to try to understand what is wrong. That in 2024 we are aware that any child is going hungry suggests to me that we have much work to do and we must not stop in our efforts to end childhood hunger in Northern Ireland. From an article in the British Medical Journal that I quote just a short portion from, holiday hunger is an under-researched process It is a contemporary term, but policy makers have been concerned about food insecurity during school holidays since the start of the 20th century. On the 27th of March 1914, for example, Bradford MP Fred Jowett proposed a bill to enable meals to be provided for underfed children during school holidays. He became concerned about the problem after consulting with a school medical officer who observed a decrease in children's weight during the school holidays. Whilst we can rightly wonder and appreciate the speed of modernisation, regretfully and bewilderingly, it is somewhat incomprehensible that 110 years from the MP's proposed bill, we are still debating holiday hunger in relation to children here in Northern Ireland. The reality, Principal Deputy Speaker, is that when we do delve deeper into the issue, is that it is not just the child who could go hungry. We know from research and through testimony that in some instances, parents and carers also skip meals to ensure that their child is fed. I want to pay tribute to all those in community initiatives and groups who provide not only activities and often educational events during holidays, but also offer healthy meals to children the length and breadth of Northern Ireland. We have heard some of these referred to already. However, in regard to tackling the stigma and protecting the dignity of low-income household parents, it is absolutely on our shoulders here in this Assembly and Executive to develop strategies and interventions that ensure no family has to make a decision on whether to eat or not due to finance. We've often heard the phrase "heat or eat." It's arguably worse that in some instances we have a parent or child who doesn't even have that choice. Skipping meals for growing children is not a decision any parent should be faced with in 2024 in any part of the world, and least of all here in Northern Ireland. In the longer term, I would love for our education system to assess the full value of every child receiving at least one nutritious, balanced and tasty meal every day, not only ensuring that children have a full stomach, but that they enjoy a healthy, nutritious food, but also that we revisit and reevaluate the societal and psychological benefits of eating and sharing together. I'm just also concerned that also we have the potential for the situation to get worse. If local food production here in Northern Ireland is significantly reduced due to climate change legislation, we could be faced with importing quite a number of food products from other parts of the world that wouldn't be the same quality as we produce here in Northern Ireland, and actually more expensive and add much more food miles to the situation. So I would ask that we support this motion and amendment. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. Nicole. Cathy Mason.
Families are already struggling with the rising costs of uniforms, childcare, never mind the rising cost of everyday bills and utilities. Food poverty can affect all of us at some point. I've seen this all too often with families in my own constituency of Southdown. The loss of a job, reduction in earnings, or a cutting of hours can lead to significant financial challenges for parents and families. As the purse strings tighten, those who suffer are the most vulnerable in society. But no matter what, every child should have access to a good meal. We are lucky to have the Patrician Youth Centre in Downpatrick, who provide a safety net for families so that their children do not go without access to a good meal. Their work does not go unnoticed, but so much more needs to be done. A high quality and affordable childcare system is one way that we can address the systemic issues of child poverty and holiday hunger. This will put money back into the pockets of working families and improve the outcomes of vulnerable children. The cuts to the school holiday food grant scheme has had a devastating impact on the disadvantaged and vulnerable children and young people. These cuts should never have occurred. We should be removing barriers for families and young people by ensuring that there is a statutory obligation to ensure children don't go without a good quality meal. Child poverty through food hunger can lead to educational underachievement, learning loss, and poor physical and mental health. At a time when children and young people should be focusing on their futures, they are forced to focus on where and when they might get their next meal. This is unacceptable, and I urge the Minister to put a plan in place to tackle holiday hunger. We must give children a level playing field and help the most vulnerable through challenging circumstances. Gurmila Mayagav.
Thank you, Cathy. I call Diane Dodds.
Thank you, Madam Principal Deputy Speaker. I rise to add my support to the motion and the amendment today, and to just have a few words on this really important issue. We have all had to deal with high inflation and the cost of living. And the cost of food, particularly for families, has rocketed dramatically. And in recent times, food inflation has peaked at 19.1%. That is a really significant additional burden for families, but it is also a burden for the department in administering any scheme. We also understand that in Northern Ireland, those families requiring food or visiting food banks increased by 175% on the same figures from 5 years ago. That's an extraordinary increase in the number of families who are requiring additional help. And between the 1st of April and the 30th of September, almost 10,000 people were forced to turn to a food bank. And research by the Northern Ireland Anti-Poverty Network found that nearly 1 in 8 children, 12% of children, around 50,000 children are materially deprived, meaning their families can't afford the basic items and activities that we consider essential to a happy and healthy childhood. The Northern Ireland Poverty and Income Inequality Report found that 15% of children in Northern Ireland are in absolute poverty and 18% in relative poverty. That's almost 1/5 of children in Northern Ireland are living in those circumstances. And as such, the issue of holiday hunger becomes really important in the context of those figures. But can I stress that, while this is a matter that the Education Minister is here to deal with today, it is a matter that is important for every department across this executive. It is not just for one department to deal with the levels of child poverty that we experience here in Northern Ireland today. And it is very important. It's also very important to acknowledge that many teachers that I speak to are tired with the expectation that they can solve every problem that comes across their desk, etc. Now, we all know that the preschool meals or the holiday hunger scheme came about during COVID. But in order to reinstate this, what we must stress today is the need for an adequate budget for the Department of Education. If we are to really address this issue, if we are to be serious in addressing this issue, then that underinvestment in education must cease. And we must be willing to support the Minister in his drive for additional funds so that he can assess this problem and see how he can address it. Thank you.
Thank you, Diane. I call Sean Mulholland.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Principal Speaker. Did I get that right? Is that the right order? Today we address an urgent issue that affects the very fabric of our society, children going hungry. It is a travesty that in our supposedly advanced society, there are still children and young people in Northern Ireland going hungry during school holidays, and this Assembly must recognise the severity of this issue and take decisive action to end it now. We have made significant strides here towards peace and prosperity, yet underneath the surface there exists a stark reality that we cannot afford to ignore. Poverty continues to cast a long shadow over the lives of children and young people, depriving them of dignity and the opportunities that they deserve. Statistics are stark. 18% of Northern Irish children living in relative poverty before housing cost, 8% of children living in persistent poverty. Over 35,000 emergency food parcels delivered by the Trussell Trust in Northern Ireland in 22-23 were for children. In my own constituency, the Mid and East Antrim Community Hub, through their Affordable Food Club, have delivered hundreds and hundreds of food parcels to children. But that funding is now ended and there's just no replacement in sight for the next school holiday. The Trussell Trust also highlights that food banks in Northern Ireland have seen the greatest long-term increase of any region, and that 1/5 of those using food banks are from a working household. It's no coincidence that we are the only nation without an anti-poverty strategy. We need to address the reality that children do not exist in silos. We need a joined-up approach to their well-being, one that factors in their educational needs, their social needs and their health needs. So whilst this is a motion directed for the Minister of Education, I also call upon the Minister of Communities to act now, bring forward an anti-poverty strategy, one that is fully holistic and factors in input from all departments. The lack of an anti-poverty strategy in Northern Ireland is a matter that strikes at the heart of our values and our sense of justice. We cannot ignore the human cost of poverty, and it manifests in children going to bed hungry, families facing impossible choices between heating their homes, as we've heard, or putting food on the table. Parents, yes, of course.
Thank the member for giving way. I totally agree with what she said, and as a teacher I saw firsthand the impact of children coming to school hungry, the impact that had on their education, on everything that they did in school. So would the member agree with me that it's on all parties and on all departments to work together to collectively deliver on this policy?
Sean, you have an extra minute.
Couldn't agree more, and I think that's the point that I was making about children do not exist in silos, and we cannot play politics with this issue. This has to be cross-party, cross-departmental, cross-services. It needs to be a holistic approach to protecting our children from this. So I thank the member for his intervention, because this isn't just hyperbole. The statistics make the case for us. Providing a nutritious meal for children is not just sustenance, it's the fuel that powers their development. By the age of 3, children from low-income families have heard, on average, 30 million fewer words and have half the vocabulary of children from higher-income families. Children receiving school meals are twice as likely to leave school with no GCSEs as their more affluent peers. There is a 24% GCSE attainment gap for children receiving free school meals. So this recent cut to the school holiday food grant has exacerbated an already dire situation. The cut has hit the most vulnerable and the most disadvantaged, leaving them without access to meals that they so desperately need. And poverty and educational underachievement are clearly intertwined. The research is there. The removal of vital support schemes only deepens these disparities. And the repercussions of child poverty extend so far beyond just the immediate suffering of those directly impacted. They reverberate throughout our society, undermining social cohesion and economic progress. When a significant portion of our population is held back by poverty, we all suffer consequences, whether it's reduced productivity, increased strain on public services, or heightened levels of inequality. The estimated annual costs of child poverty are up to £1 billion. Therefore, I call upon the Education Minister to act swiftly and decisively. We need a comprehensive plan to end holiday hunger once and for all, and it must include measures to reinstate and bolster the school holiday food grant scheme and urgently progress and publish the review into the eligibility criteria for free school meals, ensuring that no child is left behind. Additionally, we must explore innovative solutions to address the root causes of poverty and of food insecurity, working collaboratively with all stakeholders, whether they're community organisations, businesses, anyone and everyone has a part to play. This is one element of a larger picture, and we have to push services and departments to work together to build a future where poverty is no longer a barrier to our young people flourishing and thriving. Only then can we truly claim to live in a just and equitable society. We are already seeing the cost of inaction in our poverty statistics, and that's to our shame.
Thank you, Sean. I call Jerry Carroll.
Thank you. Deputy Speaker, I'd ask, is there anything more abhorrent than the fact that at least 100,000 children have gone hungry thanks to action and inaction of government parties here? Can you imagine the amount of hardship and suffering faced by 100,000 children with empty bellies and their families? And despite the motion before us today, I would ask, does this new executive care? And if it does, then what's it going to do about it? When the cut to holiday hunger payments was implemented and the DUP persisted with their reckless boycott, I think we had at least a partial answer to that question. But that still doesn't account for the punishing and anti-working class policies that have been pursued by parties here when Stormont was functioning and up and running. Because 100,000 kids, Deputy Speaker, is just the tip of the iceberg. Conservative estimates tell us, as people have alluded to, that 1 in 5 children here live in poverty. In working class areas, which have been decimated by years of austerity, that figure is even higher than that. There's no other way to explain that figure without reference to low wages, service cuts, the deepening housing crisis and devastating welfare reforms like the 2-child tax limit, which were implemented by parties in this building. Deputy Speaker, just recently I saw a shocking report by the End Child Poverty Coalition which said that 1 in 10 children here live in a household impacted by the 2-child tax limit. That's at least 1 in 10 children here plunged into poverty by the policies and actions of the DUP, Sinn Féin, Alliance and others. Deputy Speaker, I agree with anti-poverty campaigners that it's time for welfare reforms like the 2-child tax limit to be scrapped. But I think if the Executive was truly commit to lifting people out of poverty, then it needs to give people more than just empty words. It goes without saying that I do endorse today's motion and amendment, but I think it's important to stress the numbers of families who might receive holiday hunger pales in comparison to the number of children and families who go hungry on a day and daily basis. Today's debate was already being outstripped by the hardship and poverty facing our communities. People here will know that some schools, as has been alluded to about youth organisations, but some schools already offer free meals to all pupils. And I want to commend and say fair play to those schools who are taking practical steps to alleviate child hunger. But isn't it a shame, Deputy Speaker, that these schools are being forced to absorb costs that really should be covered by the State and the Department of Education? And again, I do support the reiterate to today's motion, but I'd say that it does lack a bit of ambition. I think it's a missed opportunity to make the call for universal free school meals. Not only would this uplift people out of poverty, but it would give people the best chance at a decent education. And I have no doubt that most MLAs and most ministers here, with their big salaries, have no idea what it's like to truly go hungry, have no idea what it's like to try to think, learn or function on an empty stomach. That's the reality facing countless working class people here every single day, Deputy Speaker. That's the reality for workers who have to skip meals to feed their kids while their pay is cut directly by this Executive. That's what life looks like for the family of 4 who have had their meagre benefits slashed and a safety net removed by parties here. Universal free school meals is not an outlandish motion or proposition. It's been a long-term demand of trade unions like Unison and others, which represents thousands of working class children, adults and children across these islands. The Welsh Government plans to offer free school meals for all pupils, and Stormont needs to urgently follow suit. And the failure to do so isn't about a lack of foresight. Parties who have failed to alleviate poverty for more than a decade know what's required to stop people going hungry, but they refuse to do what is required. Because doing that would mean challenging the right-wing economic logic that underpins the actions of the Executive and their regressive counterparts in the Tory administration. Parents across the North are struggling to put food on the table. Deputy Speaker, universal free school meals is an effective and invaluable way to start addressing that problem. And I would ask, will Executive parties here seriously consider it as a mechanism for feeding the hungry and addressing the poverty Stormont has wrought, or are they too afraid to upset the Tory bean counters? Thank you.
I call Cara Hunter.
Principal Deputy Speaker, and firstly I'd like to thank those bringing forward this motion, this amendment here today, and I'd also like to thank the groups out there that work so hard on tackling child poverty, Save the Children, Action for Children, Bernardo's and women groups, just to name a few, who have continued to highlight child poverty and the impact of food poverty on our young people. The issue of children experiencing hunger in times outside of term is a significant concern, and this issue was greatly worsened throughout the COVID-19 pandemic. And the extent of food poverty experienced by children can be evidenced in the large number of families struggling not only with the cost of living, but those who have to attend a large number of food banks now. And I'd like to thank the LCDI food bank in my own constituency, who do a fantastic job, and the staff there in supporting families and young people. Upon visiting schools across my constituency, both teachers and principals have touched on in their entire careers, some of which are just about to retire, they have truly never seen poverty as they do now, and they feel that children are really experiencing the worst of it. And of course, food poverty ties in with adverse childhood experiences, and for many young people, even though they are so young, they can really feel financial stress that's on the shoulders of their parents due to their inability to access food or have a lunch like their peers.
So I think that's really important to add here. The School Holiday Food Grant Scheme was a crucial lifeline for vulnerable families, ensuring that children have access to nutritious meals during school holidays. And this initiative acknowledged the stark reality faced by many households across the north, where financial strain worsens food insecurity outside of term time. And for numerous children, school meals represent their primary source of balanced nutrition, making the absence of these meals during the holiday time such a concern. This scheme acted as a real bridge to that gap, offering essential support to families who might otherwise struggle to afford sufficient nutritious meals. And over a quarter of families in the north with children who attended school were eligible for this grant, so that's well over 90,000 children that were entitled to this. And I think there is an acknowledgement of the impact of food poverty when we look at things like the NHS Healthy Start scheme, recognising the need for nutritious meals for pregnant mothers and also for young children as well. So it's really important that we're having this debate here today. There's so many challenges affecting working families, including the cost of living crisis, and we know that the withdrawal of this funding will have a disproportionate impact as well on low-income families and for children who have a disability or food allergies, for example. If you look at the cost of food that is dairy-free or gluten-free, you'll see, due to inflation as well, these continue to rise, and that can cause a number of challenges. And I know from a number of constituents who contact my office on a daily basis that this struggle is very real, and the rising costs of childcare are coming at the same time, which is causing immense pressure. But research has shown that low-income families in Northern Ireland, some of which have to spend up to 46% of their weekly income to afford healthy food, and that is just a shocking statistic. Families have to account for what they're spending at breakfast, lunch and dinner every single day. And when we look at this scheme, it was a much needed degree of comfort that could help those parents relax a little and know that money is coming in to support the feeding of their young people. And even last night, when I was shopping, like the cost of things like fruit, through the roof. I had met with a childcare provider and they've said they've actually had to limit the number of berries because they literally can't stretch to feed children in the way that they could maybe a year or two ago. So the cost of living just continues to provide such stress for so many. And I've also spoken with mothers of children who have children with autism and sensory needs who like specific foods, branded foods, and this can create even more challenges, especially if they do have an additional allergy, for example. This scheme stretches beyond the nutritional value of meals for children and can empower parents to provide for the family without another source of stress. It provides them with a level of dignity which I know is impossible to put a price on. But while I welcome the motion today and the sentiment that lies behind it, I think we must go further, and I think this needs to transcend into real tangible legislation where real support for real families who struggle each and every day can occur. The result of this, a lack of this area being legislated for, the reality will be that children will continue to go hungry and that working families who are already struggling under the weight of inflation and childcare costs will have yet another issue to contend with. So I think we need to do all we can in this House to tackle that. So today, the SDLP will be supporting the motion and the amendment, and I think today really does speak to that urgent need for an anti-poverty strategy. We know today that 1 in 4 children in Northern Ireland live in poverty, and I think it's well past time that we tackle that, and we can do that together. Thank you.
Thank you. I call Daniel McCrossan.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. This is an important debate, and Ms Dodds was right in her contribution in pointing out that this is an issue that stretches far beyond the remit or responsibility of the Department of Education. There's a collective responsibility on the Executive to resolve this problem. Just last week, we've seen a report from the Northern Ireland Audit Office that was stark. It was very hard-hitting, and it pointed to a very real crisis that are facing our children and young people and our families, working families in particular. There was an estimate there from one report that most recently said that it would take almost £825 million to £1 billion per year to start resolving that problem. So there's a major crisis here that is cross-departmental, and first and foremost, we need to acknowledge in this House that there's responsibility in all departments to work collectively to resolve it. And if anyone in this House thinks that firing a few pounds into this scheme is going to resolve any of those problems, then waking up, because the reality is it doesn't even scratch the surface. It is welcome, it's important, it's better to have it than not have it. People miss it now that they've had it and no longer have it, and I would like to see it reinstated, and we're very clear in supporting the motion and the amendment today in that regard. But we need to look beyond that. And when we look at the Department of Education in itself, particularly in a Northern Irish context, the Department of Education here has been majorly underfunded for decades, majorly. And until we wake up to that reality, we're not going to properly prioritise the needs of our children in development, in hunger, and all those various holistic values that are important for the development of our children. Any member of this House that listens to educators, to our teachers, classroom assistants, will tell you on a daily basis the very real problems that are facing our children and young people across Northern Ireland. They could write a book, and they have been acting, as well as educators, as social workers, and have been there supporting those children emotionally, but also in providing food for children who come to school hungry in the morning, food for children who may not have enough for lunch or dinner because their parents cannot afford to buy it, that don't meet the threshold basically for the free school meals provision. And I know that principals who have spoken to me often, who quite easily identify those children, have had to go that extra bit to ensure that no child goes hungry. The reality is, in today's society in Northern Ireland, particularly in a cost of living crisis, we're seeing this issue exacerbated, and it should not be the case. Our children are the most important, most valuable asset of our society, of our community, and it is for this House not just to ensure that they have the basic needs in society, but that we pave a way out of poverty and support them into a future that is much better than that of their parents or previous generations. That if we cannot do that simple thing, then we're failing future generations. It is an important motion today, Speaker, and I know the Minister feels strongly about this issue. I've heard him speak about this previously, and other members across this House. No one's going to disagree with this motion or this amendment in principle, quite simply because of the importance for it. But we have to call these things for what they are. It will not go far enough in addressing the core fundamental problems here in terms of poverty or child poverty. Food banks have never been as busy. I see it in my own constituency. I listen and speak with community workers on a daily basis, and I hear many people who are working, both parents, maybe some in multiple jobs, that are being forced to go to food banks because of the cost of childcare, so their priorities are taken up there financially, and they're left without any form of spare cash to provide the basic need to their family, which is food. But the truth and the reality is, for many, many children, the only nutritious meal they do get is in school, and that is a very damning indictment of this place and how we're feeling. What I will say today, Madam Speaker, is that we as MLAs collectively come together and ensure that no child ever goes hungry. That should be our core aim, and we should be working towards that. And first and foremost, in order to do that, we need an anti-poverty strategy. There hasn't been one for the last 2 years during a cost of living crisis, which is entirely regrettable and embarrassing, might I add. But there is an opportunity for this House, now that it functions, to work collectively to resolve this problem. It's the very least our children deserve, and I hope to God a whole lot more when this House does what it should. Thank you.
Thank you. Call on the Minister for Education, Paul Given, to respond. Minister, you have 15 minutes. Thank you.
Madam Principal Deputy Speaker, and can I welcome the opportunity to respond to this motion and engage on what is a very important issue. Can I say at the outset that I recognise the pressure on families, especially those with school-age children, with the rising cost of living and in particular the increasing costs of food. Recognising the challenges facing parents of school-age children, I set out in the debate on the 5th of March my intention to bring forward proposals to help reduce or limit the costs associated with purchasing school uniforms. My department also has a range of policies and interventions in place to support children who may be impacted by social disadvantage or poverty. These include funding for schools that we have worked hard to protect as far as we could, given the very constrained budget settlement in the 2023-24 financial year. Policies such as £75 million for targeting social need, provided to schools through the common funding formula. This provides for a wide range of interventions, including teachers, other education professionals, special educational needs support, and literacy and numeracy support at all key stages. There is £8.1 million for the Extended Schools programme, which supports over 400 schools, 200,000 pupils, 80,000 parents and 30,000 community representatives, again These interventions are wide-ranging and include breakfast clubs and after-school activities. Over £700,000 is also provided to full-service schools in the North and West Belfast to provide further support for children and young people in those particular areas through transition support, breakfast clubs, literacy and numeracy support, GCSE revision classes and many others. My department also continues to support school-aged children through the provision of free school meals to those low-income families in receipt of certain benefits. I recognise the educational benefits that this provision brings to these children, particularly in terms of their ability to concentrate, their behaviours and ultimately their learning outcomes. Holiday hunger is an important issue and one that many departments have been seeking to address for a number of years. The pandemic has also exacerbated the issue of food poverty across our society. While the rising cost of food has resulted in all of us paying more in the shops, this has been especially difficult issues for families on low incomes where making ends meet can be a daily struggle. As an executive, I trust that we will seek to support low-income families with the range of pressures that they face. For many families, this is particularly challenging outside of school term time, when their children are not able to access a daily free school meal in the way they can during term time, and this continues to be a significant issue for many families in Northern Ireland. In recognition of these challenges in 2020, the Executive decided to establish a school holiday food grant scheme, and this was funded by the Executive to provide payments to cover the cost of food during school holidays for pupils entitled to free school meals. As the Education Authority already had in place an established payment mechanism, the Department of Education was identified as the interim lead department to take this forward. It was agreed by the Executive that a wider strategic decision on the way forward to tackle food poverty, including holiday hunger, was required, including the identification and resourcing of a lead department. This interim approach was agreed by the Executive to run up to Easter of 2022. And in the absence of an Executive, my predecessor as Minister of Education, Michelle McElveen, approved the extension of the school holiday food grant scheme up to March 2023. The necessary ring-fence funding was made available each year to the Department of Education to undertake these payments on behalf of the Executive. As a result, around £20 million was provided each year of the scheme to low-income families to help with food costs outside of term time. However, this ring-fenced funding ceased and was not part of the 2023-24 budget that was set by the Secretary of State. With no ring-fenced funding in place, the Permanent Secretary had little choice but to discontinue the scheme in March of 2023. Elsewhere in the United Kingdom, the support for families for the costs of food for children during school holiday periods does vary. In Scotland, where there is a more generous financial settlement from His Majesty's Treasury relative to need, funding is provided to low-income families for food during school holiday periods, and Social Security Scotland also provide the Scottish child payment of £25 a week for each child of those in receipt of certain benefits. This is to help with the everyday costs of supporting children. However, in Wales, the holiday free school meal scheme payments to families entitled to free school meals was discontinued in May 2023. In England, there is a holiday activities and food programme where local authorities are funded to offer holiday club provision, and those entitled to free school meals will receive a free meal if they attend this programme. No child in our society, Madam Deputy Speaker, should go hungry, and while my department continues to support school-aged children during term time to access healthy, nutritious meals, I believe initiatives to tackle holiday hunger or support with food outside of term time needs to be aligned to social welfare support for families. I therefore believe it is appropriate that the Executive takes a wider and more holistic decision about how it is to tackle the issue of food poverty across society. I believe that what has been characterised as holiday hunger for children outside of term time should be an important consideration within the context of the Executive's anti-poverty strategy. However, seeking to isolate holiday hunger for children as an issue that stands alone from the greater impact that food poverty has across society, across every day of the year, is an imperfect and disjointed solution to what is a wider societal challenge. Food poverty is an issue that cuts across all age groups every day of the year, and the Executive should seek to address this issue as part of its wider anti-poverty work for all our citizens going forward. The reality is that the Executive can fund almost anything that it wishes to. However, it simply cannot fund everything that it would wish to. Therefore, difficult choices have to be made. The proposed amendment to the motion calls on me to urgently progress and publish the review of the eligibility criteria for free school meals. The Department's review of the eligibility criteria for free school meals and uniform grants continues to examine a range of options for increasing the numbers of children and young people who are able to access free school meals and uniform grants. And my officials are currently engaging with officials from the Department for Communities in seeking to update the modelling that will be used to inform this review. This is particularly relevant as families migrate from legacy benefits to universal credit. The options being considered by the review include raising the income thresholds that apply to some of the means-tested criteria, the introduction of universal free school meals provisions to pupils in some school years, and options that are a combination of the two. Ahead of any decisions being taken on changes to the eligibility criteria, a full public consultation on the options and associated impact assessments will need to be undertaken, and I would plan to do this as soon as possible. However, a key issue in this review that we cannot simply ignore is affordability. The Department of Education is facing significant funding pressures and struggling to support existing key services. There are potentially significant budgetary implications of increasing the number of children eligible for free school meals, and I will need to take these implications into account before taking any final decision. Madam Deputy Speaker, let me conclude by reiterating a point that I have made previously. I trust that if members back motions such as this one in the Assembly, they will also ensure that they will support the provision of the necessary funding to make what are laudable motions a reality in practice. Otherwise, they will reduce this chamber to a forum for virtue signalling where they will the ends but not the means. That is not practical politics and is of no use to the people who send us here. So, Madam Deputy Speaker, I'll support the motion, I'll support the amendment, but we need members, particularly those within the Executive, to support me. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. And I call Nick Matheson to wind on the amendment. Nick, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Principal Deputy Speaker. And I think, as already has been stated across the House here, I think there's widespread support for the motion and amendment, and that is very welcome. And I want to thank the members who brought the original motion. I think it's a critical issue that we need to try and address as an Assembly. I don't want to go through each contribution one by one. I think we can summarise it fairly quickly to say that absolutely everybody here has agreed that child poverty is something that should be a priority for every single member in this Assembly to tackle. I think everybody has agreed that it needs a cross-party approach. I think everybody has agreed that the community and voluntary sector does an awful lot of heavy lifting in this space and has had to do that heavy lifting in the absence of a functioning Executive, and that is not acceptable. So I think there is widespread agreement around those points. So I don't want to go through each contribution in turn on that basis. But I do want to just make a few comments around both the amendment that we brought forward and the wider motion, maybe just to respond to some of the comments from the Minister also. So there are approximately 96,000 children in Northern Ireland who are entitled to free school meals. And the latest figures also show us that there is only about a 79% uptake of free school meals, meaning that there are about 20% of children entitled to those who are potentially missing out. The Northern Ireland Poverty and Income Inequality Report 21-22 shows us that between this period there were approximately 83,000 children living in relative poverty and approximately an additional 68,000 living in absolute poverty. This means that there could be in the region of around 55,000 children measured as being in some form of poverty here in Northern Ireland that are not currently accessing free school meals. So we know that there are a number of many reasons why that might be the case, but I think we do need to think seriously about how we address that, whether or not auto-enrolment for free school meals is something that could be considered. But we also need to be prioritising policies that improve the ease of access to free school meals and ensure that free school meals are as widely and universally accessible as possible, and that was the thinking behind our amendment. Now, the Minister has highlighted his intention to act on this issue and on some of the wider costs of accessing education that this motion references, but I really want to draw attention to the wording of our amendment, which was around the urgency. I unfortunately didn't pick up a huge sense of urgency in some of the Minister's remarks, and I would just want to emphasise that there are a lot of families who will be looking to the summer when we think about holiday hunger, and they'll be deeply concerned about that, and I think we would just want to see steps being taken to progress that review of the eligibility criteria as urgently as possible, and steps to bring forward the wider strategy that the motion calls for in relation to holiday hunger as quickly as possible. And picking up on Jerry Carroll's comments, last week I sponsored the Unison All We Need Is Lunch campaign, which focused on their call for universal free school meal provision across Northern Ireland. And I would hope to see that out of the wider review of the free school meals programme, that options around moving towards a universal provision would be in there. And I think it is important that is something that is given serious consideration and is brought to public consultation as soon as possible. I would give way.
For giving way his work on that, but we also agree with me that we can't just use criteria of economics to count the importance of investing in universal free school meals, which is sometimes the approach taken by the department or even officials.
No, I would agree, and I probably won't be able to take any more interventions as I don't get any extra time, but I think that the cross-party aspect of this has been raised, the cross-departmental aspect of this has been raised. This is not just about educational outcomes, it's about health inequalities, so that this whole thing does have to be taken in the round, so I agree on that point. And I do think where the Minister makes points that we should all take seriously, it is around the need for all parties to coalesce around these issues with a united voice, but also for all departments to do that. This is not just a matter for the Department of Education, it is a matter for the Department of Health and it is a matter for the Department of Communities. So I would really call on those departments to get behind this motion and to look what they can do, and I think in terms of a wider anti-poverty strategy to ensure that we can deliver real progress in this space. I want to just very briefly pay tribute to children in Northern Ireland and the work that they've done on the Active Holiday Hunger project, and I would hope that when the Minister brings forward any plan to tackle holiday hunger, that the sort of interventions that project made and communities on the ground would be considered. I have many more things I could say, but time is against me, so I would want to conclude just by confirming very clearly that Alliance was delighted to see that the needs of children and young people are being brought to the fore in this debate today, and I also hope that our amendment will receive support and that tackling food poverty for our children all year round will be a priority for every member. Thank you.
I call Pat Sheehan to wind on the motion. Pat, of up to 10 minutes.
And from the outset, let me say that this motion is about giving children and young people the best start in life. Approximately 100,000 children and young people in the North are entitled to free school meals. The free school meal programme is designed to support families on the lowest of incomes. It takes away a significant expense for parents whilst ensuring children get a nutritious meal. And tackling the issue of holiday hunger is something Sinn Féin have been trying to make progress on for a number of years. Unfortunately, it took the onset of a global health pandemic to finally see action on the issue with the introduction of direct payments to families in lieu of free school meals during school holidays. And while this approach was welcome, the issue was that it wasn't legislated for. There was no certainty for families from term to term as to whether or not the financial support would be there. And I acknowledge the fact that the Executive made ring-fenced funding available for holiday hunger, and that was introduced by 2 DUP ministers. And I'm fairly confident had any minister been in place in March 2023 that the funding would have continued. And to address the issue of holiday hunger in the last mandate, I attempted to bring forward a private member's bill to make holiday hunger support permanent, but unfortunately we ran out of time before it could be introduced. And there was a lot of publicity around Marcus Rashford a few years ago, and I know he scored a couple of goals at the weekend there, but a few years ago he received widespread publicity in the media. He was feted in 10 Downing Street. He got a gong from the Queen, as far as I know, for the campaign he carried out to introduce holiday hunger payments across the water. This executive and Assembly had actually introduced holiday hunger payments before that, and of course the local media here were tripping over themselves to congratulate the executive and the members of the Assembly for bringing that in. Or no, I don't think they were at all. I don't think they even mentioned it. But given the publicity and the popularity of that campaign of Marcus Rashford, it's an issue which people see as important. In the course of my research on that private member's bill, I found that children with access to a varied and wholesome diet perform better in school than their peers who unfortunately don't have access to the same nutritional diet. Also, while the links between educational underachievement and deprivation are well known, the evidence also suggests that the children returning to school can often be weeks or months intellectually behind classmates who have access to a more wholesome diet during the holidays. Therefore, from a strategic policy point of view, tackling holiday hunger is essential. If we are serious about giving our children the best start in life, tackling holiday hunger is essential. If the department is serious about its own vision, which is every child and young person is happy, learning and succeeding, then tackling holiday hunger is essential. Because if children are going into school hunger, they're not going to be happy, they're not going to be learning, and they're not going to be succeeding. Poverty and educational underachievement are inextricably linked. Young people from working class backgrounds enter our education system already at a disadvantage when compared to many of their peers. And it's well known that the best predictor of a young person's educational outcome is his or her socioeconomic background. Why is it then, when it comes to budget cuts, it's the programmes which support our most disadvantaged that are always first in the firing line? And we remember all the programmes that had their funding withdrawn or cut last year. Holiday Hunger, of course, one of them. The Engage programme to help young people who have fallen behind in their learning to catch up. Healthy Happy Minds to assist children who have emotional and well-being issues. Free digital devices for children. Book Start, period products, extended schools, sports programmes. And of course, the cuts to all those programmes disproportionately affected those who are already most vulnerable and most disadvantaged. And I suppose if there's one achievement that this minister could have during this mandate, it's that type of wraparound support that our children who fall behind need, our vulnerable children, our disadvantaged children, that type of wraparound support should be put on a statutory footing so that when it comes to making cuts, that's not going to be the low-hanging fruit. It just makes no sense educationally to cut all those programmes, because we know from the evidence that where children fall behind in school, if they don't get extra support to catch up, the likelihood is that they won't. They're the young people who will be leaving school without qualifications. And of course, the evidence also tells us that where young people leave school without qualifications, they're more likely to be unemployed, more likely to have mental health issues, more likely to have chronic physical ill health issues, more likely to end up in the criminal justice system. So society is paying for it in the long run. It makes no educational, social or economic sense not to support those children in our schools who need that support. And the bottom line in all of this is the British government has failed to properly fund our public services. Over a decade of Tory cuts has stripped hundreds of millions of pounds in real terms from our education budget. A few short months ago, the British government acknowledged that this place was underfunded. That should have been a turning point, but instead their disregard for people here continued. Just last week we debated their sleight of hand in relation to the Fresh Start money, which should have been spent building integrated and shared education schools, but which is now plugging gaps elsewhere instead. That's why it's absolutely crucial that parties continue to work together to bring pressure on the British government to live up to their obligations to people and to the public services here. And the current context also makes it imperative that the Communities Minister brings forward an anti-poverty strategy as soon as possible. That strategy will have an impact on all the issues we're talking about here today: childhood hunger, the cost of education, educational underachievement, etc. And I would appeal to the Education Minister to engage meaningfully on all those issues with his counterpart in the Department of Communities. And I know the appeal has been made for ministers and departments to work together, as if it's a good idea. No, it's a statutory obligation. Under the Children's Cooperation Act, on cross-cutting issues, ministers and departments need to be working together. And there's no more important issue than poverty among our children, hunger within our children, and underachievement as a result of all the lack of support that they're getting in schools. But referring back to today's motion, it has at its core low-income families who are struggling to make ends meet and 100,000 children who face a cliff edge at the end of term time. Let's all work together to make sure no child goes hungry and give these families the support they need.
Thank you. So the question is that the amendment standing in the names of Kate Nicholl, Saoirse Swoot, Sean Mulholland and Connie Egan be made. All those in favour say aye. The question is that the motion as amended be agreed. All those in favour say aye. Contrary if any noes. The motion is carried. Members, take your ease until I change the top table for the next item. Thank you. I didn't touch that glass in case. Do you need more water or anything?